In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening, viewers. We are so happy that you have joined us during this busy time of year in between the holidays. I'm especially thankful to have a couple of my sisters again here with me tonight to have a very, I hope, inspiring conversation about the well-balanced life. And so I'd like to welcome Colleen. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We just moved back into our Wesley Chapel house in Florida. So it has been a very busy week, putting everything where we want it, cleaning things up, and just kind of letting the dust settle. And so how about you, Colleen? What's going on in your room?
Well, I had the enjoyment of listening to your presentation that was recorded from the Atlanta Women's Weekend.
Oh, you did?
Audio recording. You can just go to the site, you just type in Atlanta Women's Weekend, and there's just the audio recordings of the speakers. I listened to Cindy. It was great. And so that's what I've done.
Yes. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Colleen. I think you've also presented at one point at this conference, if memory serves. But yes, they asked me to speak on the topic, why be a superhero? So I gave our top 10 reasons and we counted them down. So that was a really fun talk to do. And I hope very inspiring for the attendees and those who find that on the Atlanta Women's Weekend website. Jill, you got a new background going on tonight.
Oh yeah, new couch. So
All right.
Different spot in the room to broadcast from. Yeah.
All right. Same room, different angle.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dig in then to this wonderful topic that we have tonight about the well-balanced life. And we wanted to start this conversation off by talking, first things first, talking about what does it mean to have an eternal perspective, because that's certainly going to play in more than anything else on how to have a well-balanced life. So, Colleen, when you were giving this some thought, what came to your mind?
Well, the farther out your vision is, the easier it is to endure the discomfort or work of today to attain the goals of tomorrow. So that could be the things that doesn't necessarily have to be heaven, all the way to heaven. It could be just things that are way out in the future that are spiritual goals that you have. And then those will help you to get to heaven. So we first need to, that's the trick. You need to train yourself to endure what's not fun now to get what you want later. And that's what a lot of people just can't do.
Yes. So what I'm gathering from what you said, an eternal perspective has to do with, what do I want, let's say, my marriage to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? And then what could I do now to spiritually enrich it? Same thing with if I'm raising young children. What do I want the teenage years to look like? And back away in time a little bit, not necessarily on eternity, but in addition to eternity, also what's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And Jill, what were your thoughts on having an eternal perspective? What does it mean?
You know, when I think about eternity, I think of that little line in math class where you put the dot and draw the line going both directions. For infinity. But to me, that's what eternity is, you know. I love this scripture in Ecclesiastes. It says that he has put eternity into man's heart.
Oh, yes.
But, you know, God has communicated so much to us that if we have that in our heart, that we want to find out not only about those things that are going to happen in the future, not to find the answers, but to be pointed toward the future, but also to consider the things of the past. He's given us all this information for so many good reasons. And if we're wise, we can incorporate all of that knowledge he's given us.
Yeah, absolutely. So an eternal perspective that includes what's come before and in the past. Yes, because what's come before that's been revealed can really add to our wisdom in making today's decisions. So love that. I was thinking about...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking about Hebrews 12:2 that says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so I was thinking about how Jesus, and he was able to endure the cross by thinking past the cross and what he was accomplishing in the bigger picture from that eternal perspective. And we can do the same thing. And I think about that every time something overwhelming happens in your life. Think about the comfort that you have right now in Jesus, that Jesus says, I will never leave you. He's right there with you. And have that eternal perspective of, I'm not always going to feel the way I feel in this moment, but right now, what does God want me to do with this moment? Colleen, what was your other thought?
Well, when I read the title of our discussion tonight, the well-balanced life, the first verse that popped into my head was 2 Peter 1 and verses 5 through 9. So 2 Peter 1 verses 5 through 9, that's what popped up. That's what popped into my head. Now, Peter wrote this anticipating his death shortly. So if there was any time you might be unbalanced, it would be then. But he doesn't. He advises calm, steady progress ahead. It says, but also for this reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, to perseverance godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. For if these things are yours and abound, you will be neither barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For he who lacks these things is short-sighted, even to blindness, and has forgotten that he was cleansed from his old sins. So this is a balanced life. I know it's a long list of stuff, and that you don't see a commercial. Nobody puts a commercial on TV telling you to do this, but that's wisdom. They want you to buy stuff and do stuff that'll help you to feel a little better in the short term, but this will serve you in the long term, and it will help you up and over and into eternity.
Yeah, love that. Love that. The second half of this question that we wanted to talk about are, what are some of the advantages? What are some of the advantages of having that eternal perspective? So I feel like we're kind of so slowly easing into this answer. One thing that came to mind when I was thinking about this was, fixing your eyes on Jesus is kind of like having a mental stare down. And so to have an eternal perspective is really to look at life the way that God looks at life, and spending our time in such a way and cutting out from our lives the things that might seem like, to an outsider, like that seems pretty drastic, like the things that are unnecessary that everybody else is maybe watching or doing. And if your focus is on things that really, help you connect with the people around you one-on-one more, or maybe are others centered, or going for a walk and encouraging your girlfriend through your Bluetooth headphones while you're doing that, and just all these kinds of things of spending time in a way that is bringing value to some corner of your life. So that to me is one way, some of the advantages, I guess, of having an eternal perspective. Jill, do you have something that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. You were kind of talking about, in a way, cutting out distractions. And I was thinking about, I was watching the program where you and your daughter on Thanksgiving week were talking, and she
Oh,
made
yeah,
a point about, you have so many decisions to make every day, and having your eyes fixed on Jesus. She was so right about this. It's just every decision is so much easier to make.
Oh,
There's
right.
one right answer. If you've got your eyes where they need to be
Yes.
on the goal, then all those everyday things that you have to go through, you know the answer,
Mm-hmm.
or you can find it.
And even if you have to confront somebody or go against what somebody else is doing, you can always rest in the fact that you can show them book, chapter, and verse and say, well, here's what it says. What, do you have anything to add? Or you can
Yeah.
always rest in that. It is so much easier in the cases where you do have to contend or disagree. That's a good one right there. And I think that that staring down temptation, staring down things that would distract. If there's something that you can do to give yourself a little practice at that. Now, if I don't know if any of either of you, if you play sports or have played sports, but games and sports really help kids grow up to be able to stare down the competition. So if you have kids, any people with kids, that's a good reason to have them play sports or games. You get good at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the same thing could be said for taking the time to learn another language, or taking the time to learn to play the piano or the violin. Yeah, the things that train their brains not to think of something new every 10 seconds, but to really just stick with it, stick with it, stick with it. That's training their brains to fix their eyes on something, and then eventually, hopefully, on Jesus. So,
and then finding the eventual reward in that. Learning to play the piano is a lot of drudgery, and it doesn't sound good. It is no fun
for anybody.
But if you will stick with it, you can play a song.
Mm-hmm.
You might even be able to play a pretty good song. But for a child or any of us to learn that, how awful it was and how we wanted to quit, and then to stick with it, and then find out, there's a reward. And that's why people quit, because they don't see the reward. I stuck with it, now I see it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get your ideas also, sisters, about, as you observe around Christians who seem selfless when you're around them, and others who seem to be battling being self-centered. What do you believe, or what have you seen in the Word of God? What does God say makes the difference between somebody who's selfless and somebody who's self-centered? Any thoughts on this, Jill?
Well, 1 Corinthians 13, love, 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 love.
Yes.
God himself is a God of mercy and compassion. This, it's a perspective. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And God loves, Isaiah 57:15. Isla says that she can't put the scriptures up, so she apologized about it. Let me just read this. For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit. Revive the spirit of the lowly, and to revive the heart of the contrite.
Mm-hmm.
So that lowliness of spirit, that knowing when you messed up and not being too proud to say I was wrong.
Yeah.
Those are the things that actually in the end can lift you up.
Mm-hmm.
God will lift you up.
Yeah.
It's very freeing to be able to say that, isn't it? That you were wrong. Okay, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And is it hard to say my bad? Like, it's 2 words. Oh, it's me. Like, get used to it, because it's not the last mistake you're going to make, and yeah, if we can just be humble enough and maybe the trick is to not even get on the pedestal ever, and then there's no fall from the pedestal. So, just always knowing that you're a work in progress, other people are a work in progress. So yes, this difference between selfless and self-centeredness. I was thinking about Romans 15, 1-3, where it says, now we who are strong ought to bear the weaknesses of those without strength, and not just to please ourselves. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to his edification. For even Christ did not please himself. And also 2 Corinthians 5:15, where we are reminded that Christ, quote, died for all so that they might live, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. And so I was thinking about this analogy. I really think it's about maturity. And I was thinking about this analogy. Obviously, babies are born sin-free, 1 Corinthians 14:20. But they're born naturally, for lack of a better word, self-absorbed. I mean, just so they can stay alive. You know, so it's a natural, it's a good thing. It's an instinct for a newborn. It's the right thing for them to do. But, you know, they're not going to ever lie in bed thinking, yeah, I'm miserable in my wet diaper, but my mom has already done so much for me today. I just cannot call her and I'm here again. You know, I just, you know, I owe her more than that. Like, they don't have this dilemma, right? They're self-absorbed. So maybe there's an analogy here of maturity, that there's people that never mature past this natural stage of self-centeredness to the mature mind of Christ that is selfless. Because here's the thing, to get from point A of immature selfishness to point B of mature other-centeredness takes a lifetime of practice, denying one's own desires and learning to say no to our own comforts from time to time. And I think, I think this kind of goes back to some of the parenting ideas that have just sort of organically come up tonight, of teaching your children to adjust early in life, like as early as you can swing it, to adjust quickly to no. You know what I mean? Like, just,
Amen.
we still don't like the no. As adults, we don't like it either. I mean, it's no, in a way, it's no easier when you're, 62 than when you're 2. But to learn to just live with no. And I know my husband, he did an interview with Scott Smeltzer, who does fantastic parenting stuff. And that was one of the things that really stuck with my husband when he interviewed him about, he said the very first thing that you need to train your children in is that no means no. Like, if you can get that down, that no means no, it doesn't mean let's negotiate or game on or like, here we go. It's not a contest. There's never an exception. I mean, no means no, always. And so then that skill of being able to say, to deny yourself, that's the key to maturity, and they're going to need that later in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is very much the difference between being selfless, even in adulthood, and being self-centered, is, have you matured past the terrible twos,
We were just studying the passage in Hebrews about about being disciplined by the Lord.
Yeah.
And this is right. This is what I learned in all my child psychology classes.
Oh.
You begin being egocentric of necessity. You don't know anything else. Everything
Yes.
comes from you. But as you gradually learn and hear that no, and you're disciplined by your parents. The parent's goal is not to harm the child. The parent's goal is for the child to become self-disciplined.
Yes.
And that's our goal as Christians, is to come to the point where we want to obey God and follow his laws and be pleasing to the Father, because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And because of our love for the Father.
Yes. And especially in a day and age where eternal death is a few clicks away. I mean, the accessibility now for self-destruction, if you have not learned to say no to yourself, you can blow your life up in a number of a few hours. You can blow your marriage up. So more, to me, it's not an exaggeration to say now more than ever, young people need to learn to say no to themselves. because temptation, and it's not just online, it's still everywhere else it used to be. And in addition to that, super accessible. So yeah, that's the key to definitely to selflessness. And
I think, from a practical standpoint, anything, whether it's become, getting out, digging yourself out of being selfish, or whether you can't control your mouth, or whether you're driven by lust or whatever, the first step is to identify that you have that problem. But economists will tell you that you can get, and once you identify your problem, economists will tell you that you can get people to do just about anything if you incentivize them. You give them some incentive and they'll do it. You watch people at work, maybe, how they act maybe when the customer's not there. So you know how they are. But then when the customer's there, they know just how to be gracious and do the work they need to do. That's just the average person. So what about Christians? So we have to, we don't get that fire and brimstone preaching. I don't know. Maybe you do. I have not heard that. I don't know that I've ever really heard it other than, reading Cotton Mather or, in a movie or something. It used to be much more stark and a little more harsh, I think, maybe in the 80s. But I don't really hear that. So it doesn't scare me. I'm not scared. So we have to give that to ourselves. And we have to give ourselves an incentive to change, like to really change, not just go, oh yeah, maybe that would be good. No, I mean to really change. And the things the best things that we can learn are usually taught by being chastised and by feeling some real discomfort. And I think you can all identify with that. I think everybody can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not trending to talk about, that life is really about escaping eternal damnation. Like, how often do you hear that?
Yes, I know.
Yes, this is really what it's all about. And we do talk probably 95% of the time about heaven. But yes, that should light a fire, so to speak, underneath us to help us then to have this well-balanced life that we're talking about, where we're willing to make the sacrifices necessary to take care of ourselves in all eternity, and it's very, very much with it. And I love, Colleen, you often address, I remember you saying that you grew up on a farm and just kind of like, in a way, you had this advantage of just having so much responsibility early in life. And so you were able to learn that to just stick to things and just where you could kind of make quiet the part of you that's like, this isn't fun. It's like, we're not asking, like whoever that is, we're not asking for your opinion. It's time to do X, Y, Z. And so such an advantage. But I feel like no matter, even though there's very few people living on the farm now, you can still have that kind of excellence within your family, no matter how the family, is making a living. Like expectations from everybody in the family is making a major contribution in, the functioning of the family and the home and the household and all of that. And you know what, kids, it feels as right to kids as it does to us. Like initially, no, but when they get into the groove of that, it's like the light bulb goes off and they're like, it feels so good to be productive and to know I'm on the right track. And then they have the skills to just be an outstanding, productive citizen in the community, at the workplace, in the congregation, especially. So
you have to be a self-starter. You can't wait for some preacher to tell you these things. You've got to read those red letters in the Bible, and that really does help to read them for yourself. And like, there could be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Wow. And it's not fun. It is not fun. We're not going to go there, just for fun. But that's what we have to have. And you're going to have to be a self-starter. You're going to have to make that for yourself. You're going to have to create an environment in your family and with your kids where, yeah, I know you could sit in front of the TV all day, but you're not going to do it. We're not doing that. I'm going to make some work for you, whether it's cleaning out a little piece of the yard. I had a friend whose dad had been in the military, and he made him he took a little piece out of the yard, and it was about 1 foot by 1 foot. And he had to clean that little piece of yard and get it like perfect. You're like, can you imagine doing that? Like, get all the sticks out of it, and then his dad would come and inspect it.
Wow.
And that's a great exercise. You have to do that? No, but his dad made him do that. And then he made him do it better and get better, make it nicer.
Wow. Wow. That is intense. It reminds me of a story that my dad told, that he was sitting outside on his back porch, and his dad came along, and he had been hanging out apparently longer than his father thought was healthy for him, and he kicked this can of nails out so that all these nails just went flying out into the yard, and he said, "Go pick them up." So I mean, this is like this is the kind of parenting that went on. But I mean, there is enough things that actually do need to be taken care of in the house that I feel like organize that drawer. Like, I think that's where I'm going before I'm going with the patch of grass. But to every man for himself. But the point is that our kids really need grit. They really need to be able to stick with things so that they can also have a well-balanced life. We see so many kids out of balance right now. So many kids. Jill, did you have anything you wanted to contribute here?
No, I'm enjoying your stories.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about this section here about what must accompany our zeal if it is to be useful for God's purposes. And so, speaking of zeal, let me introduce that first with Titus 2:14 says that Jesus gave himself for us to redeem us from every lawless deed and to purify for himself, here it is, a people for his own possession, zealous for good deeds. Okay, so we're supposed to be zealous for good deeds. But what must accompany our zeal if it is to be useful for God's purposes? So who's got a thought on this?
Well, I think a key word in the verse you read is deeds. That's plural. So I know you say, where do you have a natural zeal? And then, when it comes to things you're doing, just secular things or a job, we do put a lot of value in, like, what do you like? Well, what do you like to do? But the thing is, we're commanded to do all these things. Yeah. And it's not, I know that, some people really like to make a cake and take it to some people who are having a funeral, or, they like to do, it's like the thing you like. But, there's a lot of work and that's fun because you always get a smile. You always get a smile. You're always welcome. But what if, but all this other stuff has to be done as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
So we have to, that's the first thing. You can't just say, oh, I really like to have people over to my house. That's great. And we should do that. I love it. But what I say is, Colleen, you got to get back to a salvation task. You got to try to do a salvation task every day. Because, Jesus said in, he certainly, when he talks about separating the sheep from the goats, he talks about taking care of people. And that can be taking a cake to somebody, which is fun and happy, but it could also be cleaning up some stinky, gross mess, or talking to somebody that keeps asking you the same question because they're not thinking straight. It can be something really annoying. It can be all of these kinds of things. Another thing that he also told his disciples to do was in Matthew 28:19. He told his apostles, he said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit." We are given, he gave that to them. They have given that to disciples, and we are disciples, so we get the same thing. We are told to do that, and you're just going to have to find a way to do it. So many people have been told that, well, just if you act right, if you act good, you you're doing that. But I don't think so.
It's more than a good example.
It's nice. I mean, you better have a great example, but you need to be teaching and inviting people, getting them in. And if that's the guy that just changed your tires, it's a guy that just changed your tires. But all of these things, and some of them that won't, might even get you an argument, might make people not like you at work, might make people sort of avoid you or snicker about you. Those, they're not going to, you make cookies for them and bring them in and make everybody happy. They're not going to, they'll love you. So you can't just find the tasks that you're zealous for, but you have to do all of the ones that Jesus commands and are inferred and are exemplified in the scriptures.
And everyone does have an approach that they can take on that. But yeah, I like how you called that the final work, or I can't remember exactly how you put it, but it's like things that matter for eternity, not just
salvation tasks.
Salvation tasks. Thank you. So yes, here's how it sounds when we're living nomadically. This is one of, usually if we're doing a leg of a journey, we may have, I'm going to say, several encounters like this a month. So we were in Ojo Caliente, and I was doing an older women likewise program. And so my husband started talking to the people next door in the camp. And he said they were not looking at him at all. And so that's why he went over there, and he's like, hey. So that's how it started. And he told them somehow, and I don't know exactly how it went, but he just kind of got into who we are, what we do. He talked about how he cold turkeyed his vices and became a Christian in 1979, and how everybody needs God, and they were nodding to this. And so he gave them a contact card, and then the next day he took them a copy of my book, Your Fresh Start, which is 5 Bible classes in a little 78-page book.
A good book, yes, I got it.
How we know there's a God, how we know the Bible's from God, how we know Jesus was the Messiah, the fulfillment of prophecy, how to find the church in the Bible, like restoring New Testament Christianity, and then the last section's about what God expects of his children on a moral level. So he hands this book to them, and they're very thankful. And then we're unplugging, a couple hours later, and they come back. She comes back alone, and she puts her hand on Mark's arm, and she said, I have been praying that my husband would have an encounter with Jesus on this trip we're on. And I think you're the answer to that prayer. So find your MO. And the thing is, Colleen, a lot of times people aren't. We've had very few people be super rude to us. In fact, yeah. And so this guy who was nodding and listening, he wasn't even a believer. So sometimes, they know they need something, and so they're going to listen. But to have something that you're ready to hand out, here's my contact information, or just to ask questions. It doesn't have to feel, you don't walk up to strangers and say, may I ask you a question? In our culture, it's kind of more of an organic thing. You've already been talking. And then, so you don't have to necessarily, you can find a non-socially awkward way to do the kind of, a lot of times.
You can just invite and say, this is the congregation. Here's a little card. It's got our website and the when and where. Here, if you're interested, they've got everything they need if they're interested. And here's the thing, Cindy, I love that story. I think that is just, I think that's great. But for all the people I invite, most of them, I don't get a good story like that I can tell. But from one perspective, from my perspective as a worker, I've done my job if I've invited. So even if the people laugh at you, or if they just throw the card in the garbage, it in a way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change what I'm going to do next, because I tried to teach you, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, next. And so I've done the will of my Father, and he saw that. So even if no one ever responds in a positive way, it in a way, it doesn't matter as far as my job.
What I'm hearing you say, Colleen, is you're cycling back to that first question about what is an eternal perspective. Because what I'm seeing in your example is that an eternal perspective cares about how God is viewing your life, not that you are in the favor of every single person that you ever encounter and that they like you personally.
Yeah.
So that's
really the opposite, because we see Bible examples. They weren't popular.
Woe to you when all men speak well of you. Yeah, and so we're not going to be, Jesus grew in the favor of men, and so there is, the good people are going to really bond to you. They're going to love, Jesus. Those that loved goodness loved Jesus. And so, yeah, you just kind of let the chips fall where they may in regard to human reactions, and you just do the right thing and boy, that takes fixing your eyes on Jesus, that's for sure.
And I use this analogy. I say, like, if you had a job and you got this job making $100,000 a year, and you're supposed to call 50 people a week and try to sell some products. And then if somebody's interested, you give them some information and you send them on to somebody else. And let's say you call your 50 people and people hang up on you. You go through your first, second, third week. You don't even have anybody with that didn't hang up on you. Now, would you quit that $100,000 a year job? Or would you try to give it to somebody else there and take their job? Would you? No, you go, okay, well, I know it doesn't feel like I'm making much progress, but I am doing what I was told to do, and I got to keep making my money. So we say, like, a lot of times I think Christians go, well, I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to do something else. I'm going to clean the church building instead, because I get I get a good feeling out of that. But really, we wouldn't give up a job just because it didn't look like we were making much progress. And so we shouldn't give up our job and what we're supposed to be doing for the master just because it looks like we're not making much progress with that.
The sower just keeps sowing. He's not wringing his hands. He's just kind of throwing it out there. He's not like analyzing
wayside
and criticizing himself. So yeah,
good point. I like that.
Jill, jump in anytime you want, girl, or you just enjoy your.
I'm soaking it in.
Okay. We had a little pre-chat before we started here, and so Jill was wrangling everything she had because she's been under the weather, and so we are just happy. We are happy with whenever you want to pop in or the things that you've already contributed, but we don't want to leave you out.
Okay.
All right. So the only other point I wanted to make here in this section was that we've talked a lot about zeal, and we've given great examples about zeal, especially in terms of, what's the phrase again, Colleen? Salvation tasks. And so here's the thing about that. There's Romans 10:2 says, therefore I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. And so we need to make sure, if we're zealous and we're talking about God, that we have read his word and we're telling God the things that God has told us to tell other people. Go out into the world and preach the gospel. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. And in Acts 2, those that are saved are added to the church. God adds them to the church. And so all of the things that God told the disciples to tell other people. So that would be according to knowledge, as opposed to what we prefer the gospel message to be. And so we don't want it to, or what we're going out and speaking. I mean, this is holy ground. If you're telling people what God is hoping they'll do with their life, you need to be 100% accurate on that. Because
even if you are just a new Christian, I remember when I was a new Christian, I remember somebody telling me, even if if you're a new Christian, you better be able to tell somebody how to become a Christian.
Yeah.
Even if if you're not sure of anything else, you better be sure of that. So you can teach that and invite them to come study the Bible. That's, And now you need to grow and get more mature about that. But even when you're new Christian, you can teach that. And I don't care if you're 12 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well, you look at how much people knew on the day of Pentecost. That was a very fundamental Bible study, but they responded to it, and I don't know if they were there for an hour or 2 hours or whatever, but yeah, it wasn't an 8-week course or a 12-week course, and yeah, people responded to it, and immediately the church just exploded with growth as they went on. By providence, it happens during like a feast day, and so they go back to their hometowns. God, exactly at the perfect time, has the kingdom of God come, and so they spread that news so quickly. I think by the book of Colossians, it said it had gone out into the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
So sounds like it would take a long time, but actually it can happen very, very quickly. Well, the last thing I think we should cover then, ladies, is what can we afford to remove from our lives in order to bring them better into balance? Jill, do you want first hack at this, since we have been just talking your ears off tonight?
I don't know if I went exactly where you were thinking with this, but here's some things that can get in our way.
Okay.
Revenge over wrongs done. Those we have to let go of.
Oh, yeah.
Those we have to let go of. Things that are beyond our control. The Lord wants us to trust Him. Why spend our time worrying about things or trying to affect change of something that's not really relevant to our eternal purpose?
Yeah.
A lot of things that God wants us just to trust Him. I think, people put their whole careers into exploring outer space. Well, isn't that wonderful? And haven't we achieved so many great things from it? Does it matter in the end to anyone's salvation? Probably not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if something like that is hindering you from doing what you need to be doing to reach your eternal goal, then you can afford to let that go.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, how would you do that? If somebody is struggling with these things, it's probably not something that they can just say, okay, I'm throwing that out. Do you have any practical advice for how to throw it away or put it behind you?
Well, I just think if it's inhibiting you from making forward progress, as so many people go into, just think of the variety of topics that are on the internet that people spend their time on because they find it personally fulfilling, or sometimes because they don't believe in God. They want to disprove God.
Mm-hmm.
There are just some things that are not relevant to our life as a Christian.
Mm-hmm. I know that the world would look, just those first two things that you said, Jill, what would the world look like if everybody forgave the way that God has forgiven them? And I think that's your answer, Colleen. I think when you have the gratitude for all that you've been forgiven of, and what that means, that you don't have to go to a fiery hell throughout all eternity. I guess I can forgive other people because my debt was huge, and the debt that they're offending me in this and that is not huge in comparison. So if that, and then the other thing that you mentioned, Jill, was what if people stopped freaking out about all this stuff that doesn't matter, or that they can have no control over? Maybe it does matter in a lot of ways, but there's so much that is our responsibility that we do have control over. We're already overwhelmed, almost to the point of being overwhelmed with what we've been tasked with. Why are you looking at all the stuff that doesn't matter? So I love your answers.
Or that you can't change.
That you can't change. What did I say?
Yeah. Well, that doesn't matter. It's both. She talked about both things, But yeah.
Yes, and if you can't change it, but it does matter, is it on your prayer list? Because prayer changes things. Prayer changes things. Prayer changes the things that you can't change. And so you can tap into the power that created the universe. You can ask God in faith to change what you can't change. And just between the three of us, I feel like that just happened. I feel like that just happened. A lot of us were fasting and praying, and the direction that the country's about to go. It looked like the stock market is looking very optimistic for some reason. And I'm just saying prayer changes things. And I think a lot of people were praying in early November and late October. And I think our children are going to be safer as a result of that. And who knows the ripple effects. But a lot of change in mindsets right now toward a much healthier, more morally upright direction. We got a long way to go, but prayer changes things. So that would be in the category of things you kind of don't, how much control do I have? I only have one vote, but yeah, figuring out if there's anything else I could do in addition to prayer and these things. Sometimes we think there's nothing we can do, and maybe, are we sure? Let's double check.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something we could do? But sometimes I can't. There's nothing else I can do. But prayer is pretty big, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else to add, ladies? We are about at our little over our 45 minutes. And so, wow, this has been, I think this conversation went all kinds of very organic directions that none of us saw coming. But that's the beauty of, just having a handful of questions that we're going to talk about. It gets to flow all kinds of directions, and hopefully providentially has done a lot of good for a lot of sisters. So we do this because we love those sisters out there that are going to be listening to this through our podcasts. This goes out to about 8 different podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, all kinds of podcast platforms. It'll be on YouTube and an archived video there. And it'll be archived here on Facebook. So if you'd like to share it with other people, if it's been beneficial, we'd appreciate that. And ladies, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we say goodnight? All right.
Good night.
All right. It's been a great conversation. So thank you so much, viewers, for joining us. And we'll say goodnight.